4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So, good evening. My name is Christopher Drake, and I have this privilege to try to explain about the Buteyko method, in particular emphasis on Buteyko basics. Let's start with some basic points to begin with. Professor Buteyko was an eminent medical scientist in the former Soviet Union. He was a Ukrainian, and he held the rank of academician. The Soviet Union was had some sort of military equivalency for professionals, whereby a medical doctor perhaps would have the rank of, or a military equivalency of, a second lieutenant, or maybe a captain if he was in charge of a hospital or something like that. Professor Buteyko was an academician, and he had the military equivalency rank of that of a 3-star general. So he was considered in his day as a very, very important scientific figure of an extremely high rank in the scientific world. His discovery was based around some investigations that he made that started off very personally for his own condition, which was antagonistic high blood pressure, but led him to do research whereby he discovered, he made research and which demonstrated that what delineated those people which endured a certain category of diseases known as the diseases of civilization, and those who did not endure these conditions and symptoms, was their level of carbon dioxide. The human organism, and this is not really a debatable issue because it's something which is established in known physiology, biology, biochemistry. The human organism should have a level, an average level of carbon dioxide around 7%. The level of carbon dioxide that is in the air that we breathe is around 0.035%. As a consequence, if we breathe more than we should, the level of CO2 in the human organism will be diluted. As a consequence, the organism will try to defend itself against this loss of carbon dioxide and compensate for this loss of carbon dioxide, and ultimately be damaged and sustain pathophysiological damage from this deficiency of carbon dioxide. A good defense mechanism against the loss of carbon dioxide, for example, would be asthma. And those people who are predisposed to developing asthma, should they have chronic hyperventilation, followed by the subsequent loss of CO2, would be the constriction of vessels, the tightening of vessels, the production of mucus and so forth. All of these things are defense and compensation mechanisms against the loss of carbon dioxide. But the chronic diseases, or this category known as the diseases of civilization, spans across some 200 different conditions. Some of them, asthma is very close to breathing. Asthma, breathing, it's not a very big leap to make that asthma, in fact, is a breathing disorder. It may be a much greater leap of faith required to consider that diabetes mellitus is also a breathing disorder. But Professor Buteyko would say, indeed it is a breathing disorder because of the improper rate of ventilation. There's a loss of carbon dioxide, and as a consequence of that, according to the diabetic's genetic predisposition, they either don't produce enough insulin, or the level of insulin which they have is not, this lactase transfer doesn't occur as it should do because of the disturbance to the metabolism, which is brought about by the deficiency of carbon dioxide, which is brought about by the tendency to chronically hyperventilate or overbreathe. So this entire category of diseases, Professor Buteyko claimed, could be explained by his discovery and reversed by the method he developed, which essentially is, well, I was going to say a breathing technique, but it's not really a breathing technique, because it's a process by which people are taught Professor Buteyko's ideas. They employ various techniques he developed according to their symptoms, according to the medicamental interventions which they use and their circumstances, so that their breathing rate can improve, so that their breathing can normalize and become closer to what is optimal. And to a linear degree, the better their breathing becomes, the less their symptoms are. And in fact, these diseases which would seem so intransigent and intractable, can in fact be reversed. I've been teaching Buteyko Method for around 20 plus years. I was a student of Alexander Stelmatsky, who was basically Professor Buteyko's protege, who came to the West in the late 1980s, 1990s or so. Back in those days, the method wasn't called Buteyko's method. It had some name, some acronym, DVBM or something, which, you know, loosely translated was the volitional liquidation of deep breathing. Professor Buteyko didn't want his ideas to be named after him for some reason. But it was actually Stelmatsky and myself who decided that we should name Buteyko Method after the man who developed it. But we made a mistake by calling it a method, because it's not just a method, which implies, you know, just a singular approach. In fact, it's a multifactorial approach with the objective to improving a person's breathing. But I guess before we go any further, we should try to measure the breathing first. We should find out, is your breathing a problem or is it not a problem? Because if your health concerns have their genesis in a breathing problem, your breathing we should be able to measure it and ascertain if indeed you do breathe too much. And if you do breathe too much, then we have a valid explanation for the arising of various symptoms, and we can be quite, well, surprisingly accurate in what we can predict will happen as you manage to change your breathing. So getting back to measuring the breathing, we're going to do that now, and that's called the control pause. This lecture is about Buteyko basics, and the most basic and most important, most fundamental part of Buteyko's method and discovery, the very cornerstone upon which the whole idea is based, is Professor Buteyko's control pause. A control pause is a breathing maneuver whereby we ascertain the sensitivity of one's respiratory center, because it is the respiratory center which drives your breathing. And if we can measure how sensitive your respiratory center is, from that we can very easily deduct your average ventilatory rate, and from there we can ascertain, do you breathe within the physiological norms, and thus would enjoy optimal health, and most certainly none of the defense and compensation mechanisms which arise out of over-breathing? Or do you in fact breathe above the medically recommended amount? Now, just like pulse, blood pressure, body temperature, and so forth, there is a category of measurements called the physiological norms. And these physiological norms, body temperature, blood pressure, sugar level, pulse, and so forth. And one of these physiological norms is respiration. And according to medical textbooks, the optimal respiration for a human being is around 3 to 4 liters per minute. According to Professor Buteyko, if you have, is that visible, Adna? Can I see that? Okay. According to Professor Buteyko, and according to medical textbooks, which were basically, these physiological norms were organized, I believe, in towards the end of the last century. If a person breathes within 3 to 4 liters a minute, according to Professor Buteyko, they will not sustain high blood pressure, low blood pressure, angina, asthma, allergies, bronchitis, bronchiectasis, cystic fibrosis, diabetes mellitus, emphysema, hormonal problems, obesity, schizophrenia, depression, chronic fatigue. Any one of these category of diseases of civilization will not occur within these people, because for the very same reasons that, for example, nobody who lives in the Pacific on a desert island will freeze to death, because they're not in the jurisdiction for that kind of problem. You might freeze to death if you're in the North Pole, or in Europe, for example. That's possible, but it's not really possible if you're living in Fiji or something. The temperature doesn't go low enough for you to freeze to death. Likewise, if you have a control pause 50 to 60 seconds, if you breathe around 3 to 4 liters a minute, you're not going to have a deficiency of carbon dioxide. As a consequence, you won't have any of these diseases which fit into the category of the diseases of civilization, or what they now call chronic disease. So we're going to measure your breathing, and I'd ask you to be patient and watch me explain it and demonstrate it a couple of times, and then we're going to do it together, so you'll know yourself and you can measure your own respiratory rate and understand better about the basics of the Buteyko method. So I don't want you to do it, I just want you to observe first. I'm going to ask you to make a breath in, followed by a breath out. The breath in should be normal, not deep, not fast, not shallow, not special. A normal breath in, followed by a normal breath out. So, not yet, but when I ask you, I'd say, make a breath in, make a breath in, make a breath out, make a breath out, and then I'd ask you to hold your breath. So in other words, you'd make a breath in, make a breath out, and then hold your breath. And whilst you're holding your breath, I'll be counting the seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth and so on. So basically what we're doing is timing the length of time that you can hold your breath until you feel the urge to breathe. Well, why would you feel that urge to breathe? Quite simply, it's because the reason why you breathe is because your respiratory system is driven by carbon dioxide. So your respiratory center is here in the brain, located in the medulla oblongata. When the level of CO2 accumulates, when you hold your breath, the level of CO2 increases in the alveoli and the bronchus, lungs and so forth. That sends a trigger to the respiratory center. And when that trigger occurs, you will feel difficulty, suffocation, and if you continue to hold your breath, you will even feel some provocation as your respiratory center provokes the intercostal muscles, vagus nerve system, and so forth. I need the wiper. Tissue, it's okay. Right, so basically, you breathe because of an accumulation of carbon dioxide. When you stop breathing, your body develops an increase in carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide is delivered into the lungs, alveoli, bronchus, and so forth. When it reaches a certain level, and it should be around 6% or so, 6%, it sends a trigger by what's called a chemoreceptor. I have no clue how that works. It's beyond my understanding. But most certainly the respiratory center is triggered, and then you'll feel that suffocation, that urge to breathe, and this is the point that you'll let go. So watch again, please. Don't do anything, just watch me. I'll say make a breath in, make a breath out, hold your breath. You're holding your breath now, and I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. At a certain point, you will feel some difficulty, some urge to breathe, some slight difficulty or suffocation. At this point, you let go. This is not a breath-holding competition. What we want to do is to make a normal exhalation, not a full evacuation, but just a normal exhalation. Hold our breath by pinching the nose, and as you're holding your breath, you count the seconds until you feel the first urge to breathe, until you feel some slight difficulty. And what has happened is that your level of CO2 has increased. That then triggers your respiratory center. That drives your involuntary breathing pattern, and as a consequence, you feel air hunger, suffocation, and whatever. So, it's a good thing that I can teach breathing, because I wouldn't be very successful as an artist. Okay. So, we'll try this now. So, if you've just had a couple of double espressos or half a bottle of scotch, or you've just exerted yourself physically, or you've just eaten a big meal or something, it's unlikely that the control pause will be accurate. So there's not much point. But if you're relaxed and you're calm and there are no extraordinary, it's like any other physiological measurement. You should be calm, relaxed, basically in a normal state. So in the next few seconds, we're going to start this control pause. Now, if you get it wrong, if you make a mistake or you forget what to do or whatever, don't worry, because we can do it again, or you can do it again. So just relax first, look at me, and do be sure to hold your nose when you do this. So just relax first. Let's make a breath in and breath out, and hold. 3 seconds. 5, 7, 9 seconds, 10 seconds, 12, 13, 14, 15 seconds, 18, 19, 20 seconds, 23, 24 seconds, 25, 6, 8, 9, 30 seconds, 33, 34, 35 seconds, 36, 7, 8, 9, 40 seconds, 43 seconds, 44, 5, 50 seconds, 53, 54, 55, 6, 7, 59, and 60 seconds. The reason why I counted to 60 seconds is because if you have optimal breathing, if your breathing is perfect, if you breathe according to the physiological norms which are written up in medical textbooks, you will breathe around 3 to 4 liters per minute, and that will comport to a control pause, Professor Buteyko's control pause of 60 seconds. And if you have a control pause of 60 seconds, well, you're very welcome to attend this presentation and to learn about Buteyko's method, but you have no need of it because you don't have any asthma, allergies, angina, bronchitis. You're generally equanimous, you're at ease, you don't easily get stressed, you very much enjoy physical activities and so forth, and most certainly you don't have chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, or any such thing. Your health is going to be basically perfect. Now, you could get an infection, you could get an accident, you could be involved in an accident, but most certainly you will not have any chronic disease whatsoever. That is the heart of Buteyko's discovery. That's what he discovered, that people who breathe within the physiological norms thus have an optimal level of carbon dioxide, and as a consequence, they are not in the jurisdiction for high blood pressure, or asthma, or allergies, or neurosis, or insomnia, or sleep apnea, or mental disturbance, schizophrenia. They are not inclined to have allergies, or any one of these what were called diseases of civilization. Now let's see if you had a control pause of 30 seconds. If your control pause was 30 seconds, that would mean that, roughly speaking, you breathe twice more than what is recommended. You breathe for 2 people. You breathe double. You breathe twice above what is recommended in medical textbooks for the physiological norm for breathing. So that's what a control pause of 30 seconds means. If you have a control pause of 20 seconds, we don't have to be terribly accurate. In all likelihood, you probably didn't do your control pause very accurately, but we don't need to be dreadfully accurate. If your control pause is around 20 seconds, it means you breathe 3 times more than you should. You breathe for 3 people. If your control pause is 10 seconds, it means what? It means you breathe 6 times above what is recommended. Now, in severity of asthma, allergies, all this high blood pressure, obesity, schizophrenia, the requirement for symptomatic medications, as the control pause becomes lower, so the diseases become either more severe or more diverse. Some people have 6 or 7 different defense and compensation mechanism diseases. Some people only have 1. But as the control pause becomes lower, so your body will try more ways to defend and compensate against the subsequent lack of carbon dioxide. The only alternative is whereby a person would suffer some traumatic event where they had basically no symptoms, no health problems, everything is fine, and all of a sudden they develop some very traumatic illness or undergo a traumatic event because they don't have some defense and compensation mechanisms to protect them. At this point, I should make mention of the fact that in medical history, it was known that there were no recorded, at least, deaths from asthma. People generally didn't die from asthma, historically. And asthma was traced all the way back to Egyptian times. People had asthma, but they didn't die from asthma. Deaths from asthma essentially did not occur until the introduction of bronchodilating symptomatic medications, because the body is trying to keep its level of CO2 in. The organism is trying not to lose its carbon dioxide and thus constrict the vessels, tightens the chest and so forth, produces mucus. These are all things which will keep in the level of CO2. But conventional mainstream heroic medicine, as it's called, will open the bronchus with the bronchodilators, thus giving the person relief. They'll feel better. But the defensive mechanism was defeated by the medicine, and now the defensive mechanism becomes stronger. And that is why people who take symptomatic medication, it doesn't matter if it's bronchodilators, high blood pressure medication, insulin, or whatever it is they take, they will always require more and more. The doses will always have to increase. Why? Because we are actually symptomatically fighting against the organism's natural reaction to maintain its own homeostasis. If your control pause is 5 seconds, 5 seconds, well, it means that you're breathing 12 times above what's recommended. It's very, very serious. And Professor Buteyko had some sort of epiphany, which also you can experience if you go to the hospital. You can go to the maternity ward and look at a newborn baby. Now, new mothers will tell you this, that sometimes they are terrified because their baby breathes so light, so soft, so gentle, so subtle, that they think it has stopped. They think it has expired. And it hasn't expired at all. There was one case recently in China where a sick baby was actually disposed of in some place where, you know, the mortuary or whatever, where dead bodies are placed. And fortunately, the staff of the hospital heard the baby crying. And the reason why they thought the child was dead was because breathing is so subtle, so light, so delicate, it's virtually invisible. It's virtually undetectable. Now, and in addition to this, I should add, and of course you can't do this because you'd be arrested, and probably quite appropriately too, but you could take a newborn baby. They are so full of carbon dioxide. Their breathing is so light and so subtle. Their respiratory center so set, so perfectly, that if you block their nose and close their mouth, they can easily hold their breath for a couple of minutes. And that is why it's well known in Russia that they would take the small babies and just throw them into the swimming pool, and they would learn to swim before they needed to breathe. So this is the human organism, perhaps at its most perfect. Healthy babies don't have asthma, allergies, angina, high blood pressure, unless, of course, the mothers have these conditions, and then, of course, the breathing is passed on to the child. But I'm talking about a healthy, normal baby. So from the maternity ward, we can then go to the ward for cardiovascular disease, or if you want to go to a more extreme case, the ward for the terminally ill. And there you'll find people on the verge of, you know, leaving this plane of existence, and they are mouth breathing. Their chests are heaving. And even towards the end of their life, this chain-stoke breathing occurs, where there is massive ventilation, and their control pause is even below 5. As a consequence, they're not getting more oxygen. In fact, they suffer with oxygen deficiency, not because there isn't enough oxygen in their blood. There is. But because the oxygen cannot get out of the blood into the cells and tissue. Why? Because carbon dioxide it acts as an agent which separates oxygen from the hemoglobin and allows it to move to the cells and tissue where it's required. And this principle is known as the Bohr law, Bohr effect, Bohr effect. If maybe I'm a bit of a Bohr too, but this was his math. In fact, Christian Bohr developed this principle, and he is the father of Niels Bohr, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist. And what he discovered was this: on this axis, is this visible? Yeah, okay. We have CO2, and on this axis we have O2. And this Bohr law, you can look it up, you can just Google it, B-O-H-R law or Bohr effect, and you can find it for yourself. But basically, what it explains is that the level of oxygen in the blood is fairly static, providing you breathe, because there's 10 times more oxygen in the environment than what our organism requires. Our blood is always amply oxygenated. But the degree by which oxygen gets out of the gets away from the hemoglobin and to the cells and tissue is dependent upon the level of carbon dioxide. And here we have this curve here, and this curve is called the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. And before you become distressed by such a name, you can break it down. Oxy, oxygen, hemoglobin, the red corpuscles material, red coloring material of the blood. Dissociation means to split, and curve implies it's not linear. As you can see, a low level of carbon dioxide will produce a low level of oxygen uptake. A higher level of carbon dioxide in the organism will facilitate a greater uptake of oxygen. And an optimal level of carbon dioxide in the human organism will facilitate an optimal level of oxygenation. So surprisingly, you would think the more that you breathe, the more oxygen your body will get. No, to the contrary. In fact, the less you breathe, or the more optimally that you breathe, which is this 3 to 4 liters a minute, the control pause of 60, which is very light, superficial breathing, actually produces the most oxygenation or most available oxygen to the organism. As I say, if you walk down any street and ask people, if I want to get more oxygen, should I breathe more or should I breathe less? I guess 99% of people will tell you, if you want more oxygen, you should breathe more. And Buteyko and Christian Bohr would tell you precisely the opposite. And yet, you don't have to believe me. You can check it for yourself. I wouldn't recommend that you do it right now because it'll be difficult to pay attention to this, our little talk. But if you start to hyperventilate deliberately, try to breathe as much as you can. You know, from what I've told you already, your level of CO2 will fall. And as a consequence, this oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve will move to the left, and your body will get less oxygen. You'll feel dizzy. If you're prone to asthma, you'll begin to feel tight. If you're prone to angina, your angina symptoms will be provoked. If you are prone to anxiety, you can produce anxiety within a few minutes. And even the most healthy person, a fit, athletic, vital, athlete or whatever, force him to make big hyperventilation persistently and continuously, and within 3 or 4 minutes, he is dizzy and collapsed on the floor. These experiments were done by Henderson, Spallanzani, De Costa, the Dutch medical scientist, and Professor Buteyko. They all knew this. I don't know why in this day and age this kind of knowledge is it's well written up. It's in all the proper scientific journals and so forth. But this is the way it is. So, what's the objective of Buteyko method? Now that you've measured your control pause, and you may be able to develop some relationship between asthma, angina, allergies, chronic fatigue, your insomnia, obesity, anxiety, or whatever, within this category of diseases. What's Buteyko's method? The purpose of Buteyko's method is to improve your control pause, to recondition your respiratory center so that you involuntarily and habitually breathe more towards the physiological norm or optimum. So I'll wipe the board and we will begin to talk about some other things. Well, we run courses, as you probably know. We run Buteyko Method, and some people are asking questions already. By the way, you're very welcome to ask questions. I believe there's a chat box next to the screen, and if you have any questions, you're most welcome to ask. I've been teaching Buteyko's method for around 20 years, and I'm with a group of practitioners and facilitators, and we teach people. We've got 5-day courses, 2-week courses, and 1-month courses. I guess I've taught around 20,000 or so students, all of whom basically, well, there are those, of course, who give up or who lose faith for whatever reason or get tangled up in one thing or the other and don't persist. But I can say without any hesitation, all those who improved their control pause and improved their breathing and thus improved their level of carbon dioxide were able to significantly and vastly improve their symptoms, at least those symptoms which fit in the category of diseases of civilization. This is not a treatment for malaria. This is not a treatment for necessarily for contagious diseases. This is a treatment which is, or an approach for this category, diseases of civilization. Some other health problems, the predisposition to easily catching viruses and bacteria and flu and so forth, that obviously improves because when you improve the level of carbon dioxide in the body, your immune system becomes much stronger. And the reason for that is the rate at which the antibody bonds to the antigen is linear to the level of carbon dioxide, and as a consequence, your immune system becomes stronger. So we've gone through the control pause. We've talked a little bit about carbon dioxide, a little bit about training. I think someone's asking a question. Right. Actually, when Professor Buteyko made his discovery, you know, it's interesting. Professor Buteyko, big man, academician in the Soviet Union. I mean, for a lot of you, this is a bit hard to sort of, you know, digest. But he lived in a time when a person, if they were an academician, chauffeur, car, free accommodation, you're a VIP. He would have the equivalency in rank of a 3-star general. Because he made some great discoveries, he was considered a very valuable scientist to the Soviet Union, but he became absolutely obsessed with his breathing method, much to the chagrin of the Soviet government and the medical institutes and so forth. They thought he became a bit of a crackpot. But I think, as I understand it, his main concern around this was the fact that when he made his discovery, the average control pause of people was around 35, and perhaps in more rural areas where they were more physical and stronger, the control pause may have been a little higher. And what he noticed was that the control pause is getting lower. And he concluded that when the average control pause of a society reaches 15 seconds, that society will be unsustainable. I began teaching Professor Buteyko's method around a bit more than 20 years ago in Australia. And back in those days, the average control pause was, I guess, I'm just guessing, around 20-25 seconds. And that's what we saw in workshops. Nowadays in the UK, I've been working in the UK, Holland, and throughout Asia, we see control pause 16, 17, under 20, And back in the day when I first started, it was very rare to see someone with a control pause of 10 or 12. These days, it is commonplace. So we can see that the control pause is lowering. Now, why is it happening? Why are people's breathing becoming increased and deeper? Maybe it's pollution, maybe it's stress, maybe it's environmental factors, radiation, or electromagnetic, Wi-Fi, I don't know, rotten economy or whatever. I don't know. But we do know this, that the control pause is getting worse and worse. And the incidence of asthma, allergies, diabetes is becoming more common. Obesity, child, growing up in Australia. Well, I think there was always maybe one or two overweight people in a class, but nowadays it looks like it's 30%. Yeah, well, see, I don't know if this is working or not. So. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Sometimes, from time to time, we do get technical glitches or whatever. I'm not sure if it's the internet or if it's something to do with the service or if it's on our side or whatever. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. Professor Buteyko became absolutely obsessed with his method, not because it was his discovery or because it was his idea. He had many ideas. He was a gargantuan intellect, and he had a huge following, even of top flight academics in the Soviet Union. He was obsessive about his method and about his ideas around the breathing and the level of carbon dioxide within the organism, because he saw his view was the destruction of contemporary society. That's what he believed, with this devolution of the mind-body mechanism, which for multifactorial reasons is hyperventilating, losing carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is essential for the proper functioning of the organism, and the dysfunction and the illness and the difficulties and the misery and the unnecessary suffering and death will get to a stage where society itself will not be functional. Now, for those of you who have contacts with elderly doctors, they'll tell you 30 or 40 years ago, diabetes is you'd be quite proud if you're a medical doctor and you had a few diabetes patients, because that's how rare it was. Multiple sclerosis 60 or 70 years ago, very odd, very peculiar. Cancer 50, 60, 70 years ago, extremely rare. Speak to elderly school teachers. They will tell you that even 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 6-year-olds, they can sit quietly and relax and concentrate for 15, 20, 30 minutes. It's no big deal. And these days, 5 minutes, because the whole human specimen, the whole mind-body mechanism of contemporary people is in a sharp decline because of chronic hyperventilation. So these diseases are ratcheting upward in severity and frequency, and the symptomatic medications, of course they give relief, of course they give you temporary help, but they do not address the underlying cause. In most cases, they actually deepen the underlying cause and make things worse. So Buteyko was obsessed by his method, and he felt it was critical that it is employed in the military, in schools, that in prenatal clinics, that everyone should know that they have to manage and mind and cultivate healthy breathing. Otherwise, they will fall into all kinds of problems and difficulties. But, well, whilst the academics of the Soviet Union paid great respect to Professor Buteyko, and whilst grateful students were eternally grateful for being able to recoup their health, and whilst followers of Professor Buteyko's ideas, like myself, are still touched and amazed by the depth and the vastness of his discovery. Most people, of course, don't know about the Buteyko Method and about the essential points of his discovery and how much what he understood affects their day-to-day life. So it is our objective to try to bring this to as many people as possible, to encourage them to learn Buteyko's ideas, to practice them, to develop breath-holding skills, to develop skills so that they can avoid unnecessary medications, hospitals, doctors, suffering, and the misery that comes from chronic hyperventilation syndrome. I think some people are asking some questions.
If you could go over people's control pause and what it means to them personally, and then answer the questions that are there.
Okay, right. Right. So I think some people have texted in their control pauses. I can say this: optimal control pause is 60. And if you have a control pause of 20, it means you breathe 3 times more than you should. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that your health is in imminent risk of very serious traumatic problems. But according to the physiology, biology, and Buteyko's understanding, most likely you will develop some of these diseases of civilization. And I would highly recommend that you do your best to improve your breathing. Do one of our courses. Do some research first on the internet if you wish, or you can do one of our courses. Ben and John have a control pause of 25. That's actually higher than what I would say is the average or the norm for what we see, people who are sick. So it's good. It's much better to have a control pause of 25 than say 20. It's unlikely that you'll suffer much in the way of immediate chronic health problems. But if you don't improve your control pause will sink, and or the accumulative effect of your hyperventilation will result in less than an optimal state. So I would encourage you to improve your breathing, to make it better, to make it closer to its optimal. There is a tendency for people to overhold on a control pause. Don't forget, make a breath in, make a breath out. At first feeling of discomfort, you let go. So I guess that it's normal that people overhold a bit, but it can give them a false impression. Patrick has a control pause of 17. I think that you should do something about your breathing, Patrick. But you know, if you have a control pause of 25 and above, it's very unlikely that you'll have any traumatic stroke, heart attack, or anything like that. For that, you need a lower control pause. But you won't enjoy optimal health. You'll need to sleep 8 hours, or something like that, to feel reasonable. You will get easily fatigued. You'll succumb to colds and flu and so forth and so on. So I would recommend that you improve your control pause. You can extend the quality of your life, and you can avoid lots of unnecessary health problems. Angela writes, I think that increased usage of antibiotics and immunizations are creating poor health. Well, I would agree that antibiotics, the promiscuous prescription of antibiotics, means that they are declining in usefulness. However, if antibiotics are withdrawn, half the people who complain about the overuse of antibiotics wouldn't even be here. They would be dead. So, on the one hand, antibiotics have saved countless lives. So we should be in some way grateful. But we are dealing with a declining health. Immunizations, well, that's another issue. I wouldn't be very much for I'm not pro immunizations at all. However, there's, from Buteyko's perspective, there's a much bigger fish to fry. There's a much more fundamental issue than diet and immunizations and antibiotics. These are all issues, and I wouldn't deny them. They have their place, and I don't agree with the promiscuous prescription of antibiotics, and certainly you'd be much better off avoiding immunizations. But if I had a choice of what's it going to be, antibiotics or optimal breathing as my concern, or proper management, I would choose proper breathing, because you breathe 20 to 30,000 times a day. Nothing influences your physiology, biochemistry, and biology more than the level of carbon dioxide. So it's a bigger and more important issue than many other issues which are also important. Abe writes, are there physiological attitude factors? Well, Abe was certainly onto something. It was very curious. Professor Buteyko is lecturing about potential hydrogen and the shift of to metabolic alkalosis and all these issues which arise out of a lowering of the level of carbon dioxide. And he's surrounded by physiologists, biologists, chemists, and so forth, and they're all following what he's saying. You know, it's incontrovertible stuff, actually. And then he sort of winds up with the deep breathing principle of greed is fundamental to the downfall of humanity and its hyperventilation. And that's where you can see half the room of scientists were lost, because they could not reconcile the concept of greed with biochemistry, physiology, potential hydrogen, and this oxyhemoglobin dissociation and so forth. While Buteyko believed it was paramount. He believed the attitude, the deep breathing principle of greed was fundamental. Now, he wasn't referring to greed in the moral, social sense that we might discuss greed. John is so greedy, he takes the big slice of the cake and leaves me with the small slice. This is not the sort of greed that Professor Buteyko was talking about. It was some kind of fundamental disagreement with the nature of things, combined with an overreach. And I guess in today's society, it's hard to know, chicken and egg. You know, is society coming to bits because the whole world seems to be viciously tearing each other apart for short-term gains, to get a little bit ahead of the next chap and to live at the expense of somebody else in one way or the other? Is that why it seems that society seems to be in the terrible chaos and the misfortune that visits so many of our contemporaries? Or is it the reverse? Is it because is this greed causing the problem, or is this greed and this sort of, you know, these issues actually a result? I think somehow the two things are mixed up. I think that they're both feeding into each other. Not that it matters what I think. I know this, that as you improve your control pores, as you develop higher level of CO2, for reasons which are very fundamental and well proven and well understood in the proper ideas of physiology, biology, biochemistry, and so forth, the human organism improves on many, many different levels. Well, you don't want to talk about philosophical things and greed and such to someone suffering with COPD. Forget these ideas. Instead, just elevate your level of CO2, reduce your reliance on oxygen, be able to walk further, begin to improve your quality of life, and so forth. And then as your condition improves, then perhaps we can go into these finer areas, you know, to further improve the situation. But to answer Abe's question, I I don't know if it's the same aid that was in our last talk, I presume so. Yeah, are there physiological attitude factors? Absolutely. But interestingly, you don't actually have to have any faith. You don't have to have any positive thinking. It's not necessary that you try to break any bad habits, greed, or anything like that. You don't have to do any of that. Just you aim to breathe less and to learn how to do pauses and to follow the a methodical approach to improving your control pause, the way that Professor Buteyko laid out. It's fairly simple, but it requires continual adjustment and coaching. I can tell you all now, what is the essential Buteyko method? Breathe less. Just as a golf pro can tell you the objective is to get the golf ball in the hole. Just as a businessman can tell you the objective of business is to make money. So now you know. Why go to Wharton School of Business and Economics and study for 5 years when I can tell you now what is the purpose of business? To make money. What is the purpose of Buddhism and meditation and these things? So you're not obsessed by thought and you are not detached to your attributes. So now you know. Why bother meditating? Why are there thousands of books written on the subject? So breathing is the same. I can tell you simply, breathe less. But how to breathe less? If you try to breathe less, the next thing you know, the respiratory center will rebound. And when you're unconscious or when you're not paying attention, there will be some compensation. So we have to employ other measures to address that. Let's not forget that you're asleep for 5, 6, 7, or 8 hours a day. What's going to happen to your breathing then? Then there's physical exercise. What's going to happen to your breathing when you do physical exercise? How can you compensate for overbreathing during these times? So that's why Buteyko method is a method. It took Professor Buteyko decades to develop a systematic approach. The perfection of his technique was over 40 years. So how could we describe 40 years of research and development in the treatment of over 200 diseases? Yeah, we can say on the whole, the objective is to make your breathing 3 to 4 liters a minute, and that would be proven by a control pause of 60. But how to achieve it? That's where coaching and some encouragement and some techniques need to be taught, they need to be applied, and then you need to be corrected as you go. I'll say this, I mean, it's a funny world we live in. We live in a world where we're told everything is easy. Oh, it's easy, just do this, buy that, take this, easy, just no problem. No, this is not easy. Buteyko method, it's many things. It's many things. People are grateful. You can look at our testimonials on our websites. It's extraordinary results. People are very happy. And the idea is simple enough. You should breathe according to physiological norms. But to actually achieve it, to actually do it, it does take work. You would need to practice 3 or 4 times a day, 15, 20 minutes. You'll have some parts of developing your skills come easily to some people, and yet other aspects they find quite difficult. And that's what a practitioner's job is to do, is to objectively look at a person's practice and recommend what they need to reinforce, what elements of the practice they need to augment, what bits of the ideas they are somehow forgetting, where they are leaking, if you will, CO2 in their lives, how that can be rectified and so forth. So on the one hand, it's an extremely simple idea, but in its application, it's as complex as the situation is to normalize or to fix. I hope am I making sense? Okay. Mary Claude writes, my daughter has suffered from ME for 20 years and I feel the method would be good for her. Her pause is 16. Mine was 10 the first time, now 20. I tried to slow down my breathing. Yeah, well, your daughter should practice this method. And usually what happens with ME is within 3 or 4 days, and I do mean that, 3 or 4 days, even the most severe cases, they get some temporary respite. For the first time, maybe in weeks, months, or decades, they feel a little bright, a little better. Unfortunately, this is not actually any kind of cure. What's happened is, as the level of CO2 improves, it cannot coexist. An improved level of CO2 cannot happily coexist with chronic infection, toxins, and so forth. And so now a war begins. So those people with serious diseases, yeah, they practice Buteyko Method, they start to get some benefit, and the next thing you know, there are cleansing reactions, and now the organism goes into a stage of discharging these toxins and poisons and so forth. So it can be quite a job. I don't want to give the impression that this is easy, that you can just, do Buteyko Method, just pay some few hundreds of dollars or whatever, and then come online and listen to some interesting stories and do a few tricks, and then, no, I wish it was so. I wish, well, I'd just do a DVD, and then send it out to everybody, or make it downloadable or something like that. It's work, it's coaching, and if the person's health is a simple problem, small child, blocked nose, little bit of asthma, couple of days, finished. If the person has high blood pressure, obesity, and 2 or 3 other symptoms on 4 different medications to unwind all the various deficiencies of CO2 in the body and to retrain their respiratory center is a big job. The question is it worth it? Well, that's what we've seen time and time again. Absolutely and most definitely worth it, because you can probably for the first time in your life, you can actually take charge of your own health independently. Is it easy? No, because you have to practice and you have to learn, and then you have to deploy it, and then there's the cumulative effect where you have to, keep on working at it. But it's cause and effect. It's cause and effect. You do the job, you get the results. It's like digging a hole. The more you dig, the bigger the hole becomes, until eventually you've got yourself a swimming pool. It's not a miracle. It's not magic. You don't require faith. You just have to keep on shoveling away. So for those people who have it, if they're right in their minds, if they have an attitude of, it's time for me to sort out my health. I'm sick and tired of having this, asthma, allergies, angina, high blood pressure, obesity, mental fog, insomnia. No, it's time for me to sort out this sleep apnea. I don't want to have this anymore, and I'm willing to work at it to solve it out. This method is for those people. This method is for workers. We have to work to train, coach, explain, work out solutions for, various obstructions that arise, but it's the patient's job to do their work as well. This is not passive. You'll have to be quite active. So, but the nice thing is, there's something very satisfying about, working and getting your results. But you will do the work. You'll work more than me. I'll just be teaching you, explaining, describing how to deal with a particular set of circumstances you've got, how to overcome your symptoms using Buteyko's method and techniques, but you'll have to do the work. So I think I've sufficiently discouraged them that nobody will do this method now. It's definitely too hard. but it's worth it. Because if you work hard for a week or 2 or 3, you'll get some real results. Incontrovertible, undeniable improvement in your health. And if you don't, where will you be in 2 or 3 weeks? The same place you are now, or worse. So, it's obviously a good deal in the sense that you can improve yourself, and this is a skill you keep forever. This is a skill. This is like learning a language or learning boxing or martial arts or something. You become skillful, you can handle more things, you become more capable. And it's very self-reinforcing, actually, very practical skill, really important, I think. Angela writes, my yoga teacher told me that Buteyko Method uses calabarti. Sounds like an Italian spice. I don't know how to spell it. Maybe she means kumbhaka. Anyway, breathing. That is fast breathing, then holding the breath. No, Buteyko doesn't prescribe that at all. I tried this. After 1 week, I got rid of asthma, 35 years on an inhaler, then free of it. If you reduce your breathing, your level of carbon dioxide will improve, period. If you stand on your head holding a banana between your big toes, and that causes your breathing to reduce and your level of carbon dioxide to come up, your asthma will improve. Buteyko tried many techniques. He tried drugs. He was a medical doctor. He tried drugs. He tried devices. He tried this. He tried that. He tried various equipment and so forth. And he found the most effective was a breath holding and reduction of breath. And congratulations to I think it's Angela. Yeah, Angela. Yeah, if you reduce your breathing, you make your breathing shorter, smaller, lighter, less ventilation, the consequence will be an improvement of carbon dioxide, and definitely your asthma, allergies, and so many other problems will be improved. I tried this after 1 week of my asthma, 35 years on an inhaler, then free of it. CP from 5 to now max 30. Now, I don't know if you're talking about a maximum pause or a control pause there, but, I guess you're not going to give away what you do. I would give it away. I can't give it away. I would give it away. If it was something that I, could put in some words, 10 or 20 words, and give it to you, I would. But I can't. Because at every juncture, there will be some correction. There will be coaching. That would be a bit like me saying to Tiger Woods, "Come on, Tiger, teach me the trick of playing golf." And you're a yoga student. You should know it's about practice. It's not about going to a great yogi or yogini and say, "What's the secret? How do I do it?" Practice. Practice and practice and practice, and have someone to coach you and show you how to do it properly. So I guess you're not going to give away what you do. I'll give away as much as I can, but you must practice, then you come back with your results, and then I would advise you what to do next. If you're having asthma and you can't get over your symptoms, I will show you what exercises to emphasize so that you can stop your symptoms. And then what exercises so that you can improve your control pause and so forth. But all I can say is, this is all I have done and am so much better for it. Well, you've done very little and you're very much better for it, which just proves the potency of the idea. You see, it's a bit like money. Money can buy things. If I give you $10, you can buy things. You can buy, what can you buy with $10? Bottle of wine, maybe? Maybe you can buy a bunch of flowers, but you can't buy a car. You can't buy a house with $10. But technically speaking, money means you can buy things. But how much money you have will determine how much and what you can buy. So if you become skillful, knowledgeable, you work hard, you develop your skills, breath holding, which is not easy, simple but not easy. And through repetition, one becomes skillful. And from proper guidance. I was guided for 10 years. I overcame my Crohn's disease. I overcame my health, my problems with colitic type problems with this method, because I was coached and helped and advised and encouraged, and the techniques that I needed were explained to me and I practiced them. And even as a practitioner, I was coached for a decade before I was even qualified to teach others. So I'm very happy, I'm delighted that you have already managed to reduce your breathing, and as a consequence of reducing your breathing, your asthma symptoms have improved. But perhaps, well, I would always recommend the more you learn, the better and you'll be, and the better results that you can achieve. But still, you've already done a lot, so congratulations. I'm very happy. Even annual cold in November, which normally goes straight to chest, has been very mild. No usual chest infection. So yeah, very good. That just, you see what you did, whether you realize it or not. You improved your level of carbon dioxide. Angela also writes, also have no fear. Fear causes incorrect breathing. That's true. Yeah, fear, you know, incorrect breathing gives rises to fear, and then fear gives rises to incorrect breathing. Why? Because the rate at which neurons synapse with brain cells is linear to the level of carbon dioxide. As you improve the level of carbon dioxide, brain becomes more logical. As the level of carbon dioxide fall, emotions become stronger. And emotions are not known for their, you know, logic, and, you know, they're not the best form of protection or defense. We are constantly bombarded with messages via media and medical profession that if we don't do this or that, something will happen to us. Well, definitely something is going to happen to you. Eventually the organism ends. Everything which is born dies, and only that which is not born doesn't die. So as a yogini, you should understand what the Bhagavad Gita talks about breathing, and it basically explains that the breathing should become light and subtle. And this was one of the prime objectives, to suspend the breath in the nostrils. And when the yogi does this, he becomes free of fear and greed. And maintaining this, he becomes liberated. That's not my words. That's not the words of Buteyko. That's the words of the Bhagavad Gita. That's what the teaching is for yogis, and I would presume yoginis as well, that they develop their skillfulness to suspend the breath in the nostrils, thereby becoming free of fear and greed. Maintaining this, he becomes liberated. So, breathing is very much involved in ancient arts and practices. But of course, as things become diluted and things devolve and fall apart and spread out, they become thinner. And so the teaching of Lao Tzu, it was Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, who said, the perfect man breathes as though he is not breathing. It was Patanjali basically explained that unless you can breath hold for a couple of minutes, you're not really suitable to practice yoga properly. And the Bhagavad Gita is quite specific that breathing should be, the transcendentalist should develop his skills to suspend the breath in the nostrils. But, you know, over hundreds and thousands of years, everything becomes diluted and becomes weaker, and the teachers become, you know, people teach before they know what they're teaching, and, you know, that seems to be the normal thing. No more questions? Well, you know, the medical profession, I mean, you know, you really can, you have to sort of separate the people in the medical profession and the medical profession as a big business model. Because you have a scientific Western medicine, and this included the work of people like Haldane, Priestley, Da Costa, Bohr, Spallanzani, and these other great scientists. But then, around 100 years ago, we had the Rockefellers and Carnegies and so forth develop these trusts, and they funded and supported medical institutions, the American Medical Association, research organizations, and the great teaching hospitals. They supported them financially on the proviso that they exclusively promoted an allopathic pharmaceutical approach. Therefore, a whole vast body of scientific discovery and literature was abandoned. The work of Da Costa, the work of Spallanzani, the work of perhaps the world's greatest biochemist and physiologist, L.J. Henderson, just moved, just ignored. Even Professor Buteyko, when asked, because Professor Buteyko, some people thought he was quite arrogant, and yet he said, "I stand on the shoulders of L.J. Henderson." Henderson was a great American scientist, and he understood carbon dioxide very well, and he pulled together very disparate research and was able to, you know, he understood a lot. But Henderson didn't develop method. Professor Buteyko developed a methodical method. At least, maybe Henderson did. At least I'm not aware of it. What I know is that those diseases of civilization that I have mentioned, and those people who have a low control pause or less than optimal control pause, they can improve their control pause enormously, vastly improve their level of health, robustness, and strength. Yoga people will find that their asanas go so much smoother and better, and they enjoy their practice, and their health will improve. Those who suffer even with COPD, even emphysema. The problem with emphysema and the symptoms it causes is not the damage to the lungs. It's the deficiency of CO2. So when you improve that deficiency and you make less that deficiency, the symptoms of breathlessness become less, not within weeks, usually within days. Small improvement, but it's an obvious improvement. So I would encourage those people with emphysema, COPD, asthma, allergies, diabetes. Type 2, you can actually reverse. Usually you can reverse it completely. Type 1, of course, you can't, because they usually don't have a functioning pancreas. So, you have to, but they will require vastly less insulin than they normally would. And as a consequence, they can avoid some terribly unpleasant consequences of this disease. Another message from Angela: my grandson, age 6, has developed a distressing facial tic. Can the breathing help with this? I'd need to know a bit more, but I would suggest yes. We've seen these sorts of problems get solved out quite easily with particularly with children, because they already have high levels of CO2. The brain is not polluted, respiratory center is not developed yet, so they can practice Buteyko method. They have a different method for kids, and they can get results very quick. And you mentioned that, by the way, my breathing exercises have normalized my thyroid. The doctor was ready to put me on thyroxine. Well, that's right. Well, of course, thyroxine is a steroid. It's a hormone, and asthmatics require to take a hormone also, except it's called corticosteroid, like prednisone, Beconase, Becotide, Pulmicort, that's a hormone. And diabetes patients also require a hormone called insulin. And as has been said in medical literature, the chief hormone of the entire body is carbon dioxide. The hormone which governs all the other hormones is carbon dioxide. So we've gone over time, but we've just had such a lot of fun.
Last question.
Last question. John writes, MS would be a long haul. Not necessarily. If the symptoms, if the person has just been diagnosed, heavy legs, loss of peripheral vision, the initial symptoms, not difficult. Within 2 weeks, you start to see, not cure or anything, but you start to see improvement of the symptoms. If the person has already had they've had the condition for a long time and it's advanced, yes, it is a long haul, but they feel a lot better. Weight comes off if they're overweight in particular, and they feel vastly improved in themselves. So they do improve. But yeah, if it's very advanced stage of multiple sclerosis, the person is, already, it is a long haul to take off the condition completely. But to improve their quality of life, within a few weeks, their quality of life has improved. And if the condition has only just been diagnosed and they're only sustaining, like they're a relatively young person, and they're just having a few of the symptoms, the initial symptoms, not difficult actually. It's not difficult to reverse out of. I would say that they would still be officially diagnosed with MS because they can do some sort of like, DNA testing and they can say, yeah, this person technically has multiple sclerosis. But so what if you don't have symptoms? Let's face it, who would care if you have multiple sclerosis, emphysema, and all the diseases in the world if you don't have symptoms? So if you can manage using Buteyko Method to reverse your symptoms and to keep your symptoms at bay, then well, it's already a big help. So yeah, I think we're out of time. It's been a delight having this opportunity to explain as much as I can about Buteyko Method in the time that we have. I hope that you will take the opportunity to write to us any questions that you've got, and to do any other research. Go to other, have a look at our website, look at the testimonials, look at the theory, make investigation, give it some thought. And if any of you require a consultation, our first consultation is free of charge. And I hope that some of you may be interested to attend a workshop or even private work. But more importantly, that you'll become interested and intrigued, and that you shouldn't feel under pressure to learn this method or join a course, that you come to our free webinars and that you give it some thought. And if at some stage you become ripe and ready to do something about your breathing and to improve your health and so forth, I hope that I have the privilege of being able to help you. So good night, and that's it.